This is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guests, Erin Pfeifer, Director of Claims, Gary Rispoli, Director of Surety Operations, and Jim Budwell, Director of SDI Risk Management and Claims at Construction Risk Partners, or CRP. Our episode today is focused on mitigating risk through successful partnership. For more information on this episode and others, please check us out at The Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you'll hear from the experts about key topics that will help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, a Vice President with Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host Mike Diercksen, our Manager of Marketing and Business Development. Our guests today are a collection of thought leaders from Construction Risk Partners. With us today, we have Erin Pfeifer, Director of Claims, Gary Rispoli, Partner and Director of Surety Operations, and Jim Budwell, Director of SDI Risk Management and Claims. Our topic today is mitigating risk through successful partnership, which is very much a sweet spot for CRP. But I'd like to welcome you guys. Jim, welcome back.
Thanks, Chris.
Erin, Gary, thanks for joining us this go around. Happy to have you guys. How are you both doing?
Good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
All right. And how about yourself, Mike?
I'm good, Chris. This is a great crew and got March Madness going on, so it's a good time to connect and hang out with everyone.
Absolutely. Well, before we dive into our main topic, I was hoping that each of our guests could share a little bit about who they are and how each of you kind of got into your current role at CRP. I guess, Gary, maybe I'd start with you.
Sure. My path was a little winding. After graduating from college, I worked actually in a family business for 8 years. Anyone that has a family business knows that you're intimated with it early on. And I was pretty confident I wouldn't enjoy it. And after 8 years, I confirmed any doubt and kind of stumbled into the surety business. Anyone that says that their lifelong pursuit is to become a surety underwriter or broker is out and out lying, because it's such a unique little niche. But I wound up in it, and through the course of time, I've been in. I worked for Chubb Surety, worked in their home office, managed their Great Lakes region out in Minneapolis, came back to manage the Mid-Atlantic region, and ultimately wound up as their field operations officer, managing the U.S. field ops for them. Simultaneously, I've known the folks at Construction Risk Partners a long time, and ultimately came over here to lead our surety practice.
You know, that's not the first time we've heard that, Gary. You know, stumbling into insurance and surety seems to be the on-ramp for most professionals, it seems, including myself. So we're glad to have you today. Jim, how about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing, Chris. Well, after college, I spent almost a decade doing construction management for either consultants or engineering firms, mostly in the heavy highway sector. Then I got pulled into the dark world of insurance, which again was, not something I planned on. Worked for Zurich as a subguard risk engineer for almost another 10 years or so. And hard to believe that it's about 9 years now at CRP, primarily 99% in the SDI space.
Good deal. And last but not least, Erin, how about yourself?
Well, unlike these guys, I was actually born into an insurance family. And I was hell-bent on not going into the insurance world, but here I am. I have a little bit of a weird path myself. My degree, I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I have a degree in Latin American studies with a concentration in business. And my first job, I was hired to be an on-site claims adjuster at a meat packaging plant. So that was a treat. And then from there, I went to another large regional broker here in Philadelphia, was there for about 14 and a half years, and then came over to Construction Risk Partners. And I've been here for 10 years now and love it here. Everyone's great, and it's been a ride.
Yeah, that's certainly an on-site meat packing claims adjuster. I can only imagine the claims that might have come from that, but
lots of
that's a different podcast, you know. So no, thank you all for joining us today. There's a lot of brain power here, and we're really excited to have you guys on. You know, when we were getting together early on to kind of talk about this podcast and break down a topic and what makes successful representation for insureds from start to finish, we kind of came up with this idea that it was probably easier to break this into two sections, both a pre-loss and then with a proactive mindset of kind of getting ahead of things, and then a post-loss scenario. So each of you have a unique role at CRP, yet there is some overlap there. And it's important that you kind of collaborate and share this information. So could you guys expand on that a little bit more and kind of what that looks like and how you guys do that collaboration? And maybe I'll kick it off to Jim to start.
Well, I think one of the easiest ways that we do it on the SDI side is when we're engaged with a potential client, we like to try to do almost like a pre-underwriting meeting where we get an idea of what makes them tick, how they operate, are they SDI ready? And sometimes those prospects come from other lines. So we then try to make sure that everybody's on the same page with this contractor has some room for improvement in these areas, or they are operating at a best-in-class level at these areas. And sometimes that's surprising, right? And other times it's common knowledge. But that's one of the ways we try to have that kind of that cross-referencing, if you will.
Absolutely. And so you guys get together kind of when it's applicable to kind of share that information. But I'm sure that also comes up. I mean, Gary, with surety work kind of aligning closely with SDI in some ways, does that happen frequently in your opinion?
It happens frequently, and I would say, and Jim chime in, but it's happening even more frequently as, you know, the subcontractor market is a little bit fragile at this moment. And so that everyone is mindful of that. And so we've got a number of people that we really kind of look at ourselves, both SDI and surety, as kind of performance risk experts. And so we do a lot of collaboration. We have conversations because ultimately, in some regard, the surety focus and the SDI focus is very similar. It's about contractors being able to perform and what hurdles might be in front of them that would prevent them from performing. So we do a lot of that type of collaboration. We, you know, on the surety side especially, we're really heavy into financial analysis. So sometimes that helps our SDI clients in terms of there's a question about subcontractor pre-qualification. We can kind of provide some of our guidance in terms of how we view a financial piece or an operational piece.
Excellent.
Gary, maybe building on that, we usually find that an easy way for our audience to kind of digest and understand what those examples look like is kind of by offering up a case study. Is there a specific instance of something like that you think might help demonstrate kind of how you were able to accomplish that? Maybe something in recent history?
Yeah, I can give a number of examples, but one in particular I can think about is receiving a phone call from one of our SDI clients with a question on a subcontractor's financial statement. And as we walked through it, what became apparent was this subcontractor was a recently transitioned to an ESOP company. And so anyone that has any familiarity with that transition, initially there's quite disruption to the balance sheet, and usually equity is flipped upside down, and it's all about structure and understanding. Your financial underwriting goes from looking at the kind of the stable elements of net worth and maybe working capital, to also then becomes very critical to understanding financial projections and cash flow. And so walking that client through that to say it's not necessarily bad, but you need to understand it and you need to mitigate the potential risk associated with that is an example. And we're doing quite a bit of, especially on larger projects, sitting down, like we have a client we sat down with, and we have weekly meetings at this point. They're involved in a very large job, and they're being very strategic about what risk they want to mitigate through SDI and what risk they want to mitigate through surety bonds. And a lot of that has to do with number one, the pre-qual, and number two, you know, how critical is that subcontractor to the path and schedule of the project? And maybe in certain situations, instead of taking some of that risk on themselves through an SDI deductible, they're more comfortable just getting 100% performance and payment bond to mitigate the risk for them. So those are kind of general examples of kind of some of the things we get involved with.
And one other thing, Chris, to add on to that, just very specifically, that Gary and I will oftentimes work together is during the pre-qual efforts, or maybe there's a subcontract that is excessively large and it does not necessarily fit inside someone's SDI program. It needs to get referred in, right? So the carrier partners will want to see some documentation to have an opportunity to underwrite that specific request. And as part of that pre-qual package will include the surety letter, or maybe it's the broker letter that talks about the surety capacity. Sometimes it's not familiar to me, right? So I'll be able to go to the office next door or pick up the phone if we're not in the office together and ask Gary, what do you know about this group? Are they reputable? Have they been around a long time? So that collaboration goes a long way. And the client of ours is then able to get the benefit of that expertise on the surety side, because Gary's been around the block and has some really good insights.
And then that's a great point. And so we also through those conversations, if one of our general contractor doesn't have some criteria about what bonding company is acceptable relative to like an AM Best rating, there's something called the U.S. Treasury listing that basically the government indicates what they would be comfortable with on a single project limit per surety. And we think it's a good idea for our contractors to have the same type of criteria when they accept bonds. If they're paying the premium per bond, they certainly want to feel comfortable that it will respond in the event of a claim.
You know, something that stood out to me in that you guys mentioned your weekly meetings. I got to imagine that's just a treasure trove of information at a certain point, right? You're building that rapport with your clients, but then at the same time, there's a lot of information shared that maybe doesn't always come up. Erin, do you think that that's something that really benefits the organization and especially from a claims perspective, kind of just knowing what's going on and you can maybe head something off or nip it in the bud?
Absolutely. And one of the things, outside of just like a weekly meeting with a client, one of the things that we do early on with our clients is really getting to understand their best practices and letting them know what we see out there as best practices, so that they understand what they could be putting into place and into practice to prevent and mitigate losses from ever happening in the first place. So we've developed a process here that we call MORE. It's the management of risk evaluation, where we take the time to do a really deep dive into how our clients operate. And we look at it from a leadership perspective, and we have a number of different modules that we walk through to understand, what are they doing from a fleet perspective? What are they doing from a general liability perspective, risk transfer? Gary's in the process of developing the surety module, and the SDI module. So we go really deep. How are they handling and managing their claims? The mentioned risk transfer, that's hugely important. Are they looking at their contracts, or are they looking at their subs contracts and their policies, and what are we doing to mitigate that risk? So it's a commitment on their part and it's a commitment on our part. And we're willing to take the time to really help them become a better risk. And that's the whole idea behind it.
Yeah, it's doubling down on that key word from our topic today is partnership. It's truly understanding and doing that proactively before there's an issue, right? Which is so important. So not that we want to segue to it, but we did mention at the top that we were going to have kind of a proactive approach, and then there's that post-claim scenario. So there's certainly plenty of coverages like builder's risk, SDI, surety, where you can start thinking it's one thing, but maybe it kind of blends into a different line. And the further you go down that road, you realize, there's multiple elements of coverage here at play. So how do you guys assess and manage those multiple lines and, excess lines once you're notified of a claim? And maybe Erin, I'll go to you as the claim director.
Sure. Well, all of our claims folks here, and I would say everybody at Construction Risk Partners first, is we're all technicians. We are very much coverage technicians. So when a claim does come in the door, we're really looking at it from all angles to truly maximize, the coverage that we've placed for our clients in all areas. So if it is a standard general liability claim, I might be looking at this and saying, hey, this could be a potential coverage issue, but hey, do they have an SDI program? If general liability isn't going to cover this, I might be going and knocking on Jim's door, say, hey, Jim, listen to this scenario. Do we think that this could trigger some SDI coverage? We have a case right now going on active for one of our clients where it is an ongoing general liability claim, but we know that one of the subs was going out of business. So we proactively placed that sub into default I'll let Jim go into more of an explanation on that, but just to make sure that, hey, we've done everything, we've placed everyone on notice in a timely manner so that we're not caught with our pants down, so to speak, and we want to make sure that we're protecting our clients.
Yeah, and in that specific example, right, we just wanted to err on the side of caution to make sure we reserved rights under SDI, even though it looked like it's going to be a GL issue. And there were early conversations between Erin and I. Ultimately, we involved the client, right? That's been going on for almost a decade, right? It's been a very long time. But again, it's the client pays for these insurances, and you want to make sure that that's the backstop. So it's our job to kind of collaborate and make sure that the coverages are in place, that there's no gaps, right? In fact, sometimes there can be overlaps, which is better, but it's just, that internal communication, and then we can let them rest assured that we've got it under control.
Better to have it and not need it, right? Better to have the
Indeed.
overlapping coverage than to be looking for it somewhere else.
Yeah, and a lot of times folks forget that, it might seem like, oh, this is a standard builder's risk claim, right? But there's water involved. So, your builder's risk policy is going to have, a pollution exclusion on it. They're going to exclude mold. There might be a sublimit, maybe $50,000, $100,000, but we all know how expensive mold can get, right? So we know, hey, we better get this pollution policy on notice at the same exact time. We know there might be limitations with how soon you have to get things reported because maybe it's a claims made policy. We're aware of all of that. So we make sure we're protecting our client, and we're always looking at these things and how can we maximize coverage for them.
Given all the nuance, it definitely pays to have a well-coordinated and communicating team behind you, helping position insureds for success, both prior to and post loss. I mean, and even in the prior to case, Gary, the first thing you mentioned, you were talking about an ESOP program for ownership transfer. It's something that would never even come to mind for me is like top 10 list of things I would be considering when looking at either surety or placing SDI coverage. So it's there's so much nuance there. You guys are obviously well coordinated internally and communicate very heavily. But outside that room, outside of your weekly coordination meetings, are there areas where you think the industry maybe has some room to improve in that respect? And Erin, maybe I'd start with you again.
Sure. One of the things we've noticed, obviously, I'm going to go to builder's risk again, because it's like a crazy marketplace, right? And we're seeing a lot of quota shares out there. So that means there's like, there could be 10 different carriers on a program. And even maybe within that one of those 10 carriers, there might be 5 other carriers that each have a little piece of it. So if there is a claim on the policy, it can be tricky coordinating all of that. So one of the things that we do in advance is we'll identify an adjuster and place them on the policy. They're actually endorsed onto the policy as, hey, this is the person who's going to be that quote unquote outside adjuster, whatever the firm is, so that we know who's going to be when the loss occurs. We're making that phone call. They're coordinating everything. We've built a relationship with that person. We know how they work. So you've already established all of that. They know when we're emailing them, we're going to get a response quickly. When they make that recommendation for payment, they're going to be chasing down those carriers to get checks cut quickly. So, when you have large quota shares like that, it can be tricky if we're the ones having to coordinate all of that. So by identifying folks and experts in advance, hugely helpful in the claims process.
Yeah, that was something that we had Tracy Sachs on here a while back on the podcast, and I'm sure you're not only familiar with Tracy, but one of the
Love
things
Tracy.
he said too was get your team in place before, right? Know who you want to go to, understand who you want to work with, and it's there's a lot of power in that, and having some comfortability and some honestly repetition, right? You get to know people a little better, you know who you're working with, and there's some strength to that. So that kind of leads me into this next question though, because one of the things I'm hearing about early and often at these industry conferences, the size and the scope of more and more mega projects. And with those projects comes an increasing entanglement of coverages necessary, limits necessary, and more opportunity for that overlap we were kind of talking about. So How do you guys prepare your clients for those when they're growing, they're reaching new heights, they're kind of stepping up and taking on bigger projects, but that's got to be an added level of attention to detail on your part to make sure that those key players are defined and everyone knows, in any kind of situation where they need to go to first.
Well, I think one of the first things you need to do is you have to analyze the limits that you have available to make sure that they're adequate.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the program might be built for a certain framework of construction projects, and those mega projects, you don't have adequate limits, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
have a standalone program that might need to be developed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the first things you need to do. Garrett, do you have anything on that one?
Yeah, well, a lot because, and obviously the surety product's very different than insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for our focus is twofold. So in that example, Mike, you may need to provide a surety bond, the GC. So you need to make sure as a contractor is growing, that number one, you have that early understanding of the business plan and where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
So that you have a surety program that supports that growth and that business plan. And then so as projects come up, number one, making sure that you have the bonding capacity to do the larger job. But probably more importantly, we're really focused on enterprise risk. So having a really deep understanding, that's why I love the process that Erin's put in place relative to more. And it's really for us on the surety side, understanding the contractor's go, no go process.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of that risk evaluation matrix, because obviously with larger jobs comes greater risk and there's a lot of exposure. So, things like what type of contractual risk are you willing to take and what are you not willing to take? What types of projects kind of fit the scope of your operation? If you're a GC, larger jobs, can you use the same subcontractor base or have these jobs kind of outstrip their capabilities and now you're dealing with a whole different platform of subcontractors that could create additional risk. So you have to evaluate all those things. And sometimes we like to say here, we'll tell a contractor what they need to know, not necessarily what they want to hear, but we're going to lay out everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because not that I could build a skyscraper, but we all have experience about things that have gone well and things that have not gone well. And we enjoy sitting down and passing that along. And ultimately, when we really understand our contractor clients, that puts us in the best position to give good advice.
Yeah, no surprises, right? You gotta measure twice, cut once, no surprises, especially with those bigger projects because it's a bigger surprise.
Right.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, if a loss does occur on some of these, like on a mega project type of situation, don't be afraid to bring in an expert.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're there for. They have a specialized expertise in something. Use that person, do you need a loss preparation expert? I'm certainly not an accountant, maybe Gary is. But, and do we need a specialized scheduler? Because sometimes the carriers aren't going to necessarily want to use your internal folks. You're going to need outside help. So, and you have a building to build, right? That's what your expertise is in, building buildings, not figuring out the damages associated with a claim and the delay costs and things of that nature. So don't be afraid to hire an expert to help you out.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, and Mike, it actually brings me back to your previous question about, what do we see in the industry that could be improved upon pre-loss and post-loss? The scheduling expert, right? The consultant to come in and help in advance of a complicated project, right? That's money well spent when you have a project with excessive liquidated damage clauses, for instance, right? We often see it from a post-claim scenario where the scheduling documentation is not what it possibly should be. And that can lead itself to a frustrating point in when you're trying to close out a claim. So I think bringing in expertise early on, that can help with identifying the critical path, with allocating the proper resources, anticipating delays. There's all kind of specific things that expertise can bring to your project that could at least mitigate or maybe even avoid the potential loss in a claim scenario.
You got to spend money to save money sometimes, bring it in on the front end so that you're not dealing with it on the back end.
Yep. We all make more money going forward than we do going backward.
Very, very true, especially in my experience, Jim. Well, definitely a great conversation today. Appreciate you all weighing in there. Typically, before we wrap up, we like to give our audience 3 sort of key takeaways from each episode. Building on our discussion, what do you think those key takeaways should be? And maybe, Gary, I'd start with you.
Yeah, and I think you're going to hear a very similar theme amongst the 3 of us here, and it starts with communication. No mystery there, and just and sitting down and utilizing the experts around you, like we've all said here. We really enjoy sitting down with clients, understanding their business, and once you do that, then you can provide a tailored solution to any issues they may see, or provide that strong advice. So I just think that communication leads to us being able to provide proactive guidance to help avoid the pitfalls in what we all know is an incredibly risky business.
Yeah, and I would say, for us, I think we're in 3 really different disciplines within our organization, yet we collaborate with one another constantly. So don't be afraid to ask questions. We're constantly in and out of each other's offices, and and bringing in those various disciplines, because Gary's better at something than I am, Jim's better at something than I am, and I know that, and I lean into it, and I look for their help and their expertise. I'm not afraid to admit that I don't know everything.
And you're better at most things than both of us, so.
I don't have much more to add, Mike, other than really just to reinforce what's been said about setting up weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever the cadence may be amongst the multi-lines, which is us, the folks in this room, along with the client, along with the carrier partner. Oftentimes, you don't have an agenda, but you'll have that opportunity to ask questions, and you'd be surprised more times than not that conversation goes on into a direction you would have never anticipated. So it's that open lines of communication and giving it an opportunity to have that communication, that touch point, if you will. That's one of the biggest takeaways.
And just the one final thing in listening and dovetailing to what Erin said is we do all have kind of specific areas of expertise, and I'd like to think we do a really good job of bringing that to bear to clients, as opposed to just getting a little piece of our expertise. When we bring folks like us all into a situation, it's rare that there's something that pops up that we haven't seen. And we'd like to think that it certainly benefits the client, right?
Yeah, sometimes it seems like overkill when we go out to a client meeting and there's like 5 of us rolling in, but there's a reason there's 5 of us rolling in.
Right. Yeah, and it seems to be it's a common through line on this podcast, but I think also just really thematic in the work that we do as proactive is that deliberate communication definitely seems to be a pre and post claim. Seems to help things go smoothly. That seems to be what makes the world go round, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that kind of leads us to, we always follow up the takeaway question with an action item, but it seems like the action item here is to, if you're not communicating, get communicating. So maybe I'll change that question a little bit. How would you guys prescribe that? Is there a cadence to it? Is there a certain stakeholders you want at that table? What would you guys recommend is the best way to start that line of communication?
Set up a monthly, weekly, bi-weekly conference call with your broker and all of the different team members from the broker. And your risk management team, your leadership, your safety, whomever's involved in that. Sometimes they're 5 minutes, sometimes they're an hour. It depends. But getting on the phone, having the call, and just knowing that you have it scheduled. Right. The questions are gonna come up.
Yeah, those regularly scheduled meetings can go a long way, right? Everybody's busy. Everyone's travel schedules are pretty hectic. So if the client knows that I'm going to be speaking to Jim and Gary and Erin at 8:00 on Wednesday morning, for instance, right, then they might not feel the need to pick up the phone and try and track us down Tuesday afternoon. They can just table that and we can get through the working agenda and then say, oh, while I have you guys, can we talk about X, Y, Z? So it's that kind of predetermined availability that can go a long way.
And I think that kind of disciplined approach, we all get so busy, and before you know it, now we have an emergency on our hands because we hadn't connected like that. Whereas you have this disciplined scheduled meeting, hey, things pop up, but it helps avoid that kind of thing. So we're not, running with our hair on fire.
Yeah, I think we can all agree, regardless of industry, it's easier to move a calendar meeting that's already on the calendar than to create one, right? So just taking that discipline, putting it on there. Oh, we could always move it, but when you're always going, oh, we really got to do that, let's find a time, it always and inevitably is later, next time. And then, like you said, that's where you run with your hair on fire, Gary, which we don't recommend that. So guys, this has been such a great conversation. We really appreciate you joining us today. This is the Building Bite podcast. Jim's been on before, so he knows a little bit about this, but we always like to ask our experts, what are they taking a bite out of today? So you're all located in the Philly area. So I'm hoping for 3 different recommendations because I got to go around a little bit. So where would you guys take a bite out of today? And Erin, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to give you a little insight. So I think we're all going to go watch some games. We got March Madness going on. So we got to have some pub grub in here, right? So probably head over to City Works and either have some fish tacos, because their fish tacos are incredible over there, or just a big juicy burger.
Yeah,
Nice.
I can tell you, I'm already going to do the smoked chicken wings. Right? They're not fried. They're nice char. You get some dipping sauces, and man cannot live on cheesesteak alone.
And Gary, how about yourself?
I'd like to say I'm going to go have a salad, but that would be a lie. I think there is a burger calling my name.
There you go.
Perfect. Honest to a fault. Well, thank you guys for chatting with us today. Definitely appreciate the time. If our listeners want to hook up with you guys after the podcast airs, where can they find you? Gary, you're in the top corner of my screen, so I'll start with you again.
I guess probably the best place is our website, constructionriskpartners.com. And you can always reach the 3 of us on LinkedIn.
All right. Jim, how about yourself? Any additional contact info to add there?
No, I think the website is a good jumping off point, right? You can find our phone numbers, our office locations, our email addresses, and of course, LinkedIn as well, right?
Perfect. And Erin, how about yourself?
Ditto to all of the above.
All right.
You guys are brave to throw your phone numbers out there. That's it. But that's good. Hopefully you get a few phone calls after this.
This was fun. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We appreciate it.
Good conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your time and advice, which is even more valuable. Thank you all.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.